So thank you very much, Chairman, Professor Donati. I'm very glad that I was invited here, and this is sort of, if you think of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences as one nation, so I'm coming from the other nation now, and we have some friendly interaction. I'm also in my title, as you can see, maybe we can dim the light a little bit. Thank you very much. So I'm using slides. I'm playing with words a little bit, as you can see. So the state of the world as opposed to the world of states, if you like. And this has a justification because before I start my slides, I should just tell you in a very simplistic way, you can think of nation states as defined through their territories. So they have borders, and with global environmental change, this border governments and governance does not work anymore, because you have the atmosphere, you have the hydrosphere, including the oceans, and you have the biosphere. So, very simple. You cannot have a border police for CO2 in the air. You cannot have a border police for sea level rise. And you cannot have a border police for birds flying across continents. So the two-dimensional territorial management of the world does not work anymore if we change the three-dimensional setup of our planet. So with climate change, ultimately you have a challenge of the nation state based on territorial makeup. It's as simple as that. So what I'm going to tell you is first precisely the state of the world. So what is the state of the common good, our common house, as stipulated in Laudato Si, the encyclical. Then I will talk about the three options we have to manage our planet entirely. And the first one is decarbonization of our economy. The second is often overlooked, but equally important, preserving the natural systems who serve as carbon sinks, including the rainforests, for example, the salt marshes, often overlooked, extremely important. The third one is that I do believe that with climate change, even if we can contain it to 2 degrees, there will be global migration necessary. So the current concepts do not work anymore. So I will reintroduce a concept which was promoted by Fridtjof Nansen in 1923, the Nansen passport. Okay, so let me go quickly, and I will skip some of the slides, and we have time during the discussion, of course. So first of all, this is just the evidence. This is the global mean temperature since 1860 here, and you see it's a wiggly curve as all physical entities. This is not a smooth curve, but you clearly see a trend. It's going upwards. So we have already warming since the Industrial Revolution of 1 degree, even more than 1 degree. Now, if you think 1 degree is very little, think of the planetary surface temperature as the internal body temperature of the human being. And if you add 1 degree, you have slight fever. If you add 2 degrees, you have fever and you feel very ill. If you add 5 degrees, you are dead. And this really works for the planetary environment. So this is actually a very dramatic change. On the left-hand side, you see 10,000 years ago, the CO2 in the atmosphere, it was slightly above 280 parts per million. But then you see how we have changed this. So we have added already almost 50% of CO2 in the atmosphere, so in a very dramatically short time. And the temperature response is equally dramatic. So this is not a natural fluctuation. You see, we completely changed the character of the system. Now, what does it mean? I have already referred into the internal body temperature. Now, if our world is going to change, if you heat up the planet 1 degree, 2 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 degrees, what will happen? It will not just get warmer. You will have change in the character of what I call the vital organs of our planetary machinery. These are the big ice sheets, of course, Greenland ice sheet, West Antarctic ice sheet. These are the big ecosystems, the Amazon rainforest, for example, the Great Barrier Reef, which is about to die already. These are the circulation patterns in the atmosphere, the monsoon systems, the jet stream, I referred to that, and the ocean currents. And all of these patterns and big systems are going to be changed with when you turn up the heat. And I have introduced this notion of tipping points and tipping elements into the debate at a lecture I gave at Oxford University in the year 2000. It has become now a focal point for the debate. So I will just refer to these two things because that is really affecting our weather. So now people start to feel it. So far we have thought of global warming as a distant thing, maybe affecting the Fiji Islands, but now it's coming to Europe and the United States. This is the so-called jet stream. You see the simulation. This is a band of high-speed wind above 10 to 12 kilometers above the ground. It is actually separating Arctic cool air from the temperate mild air we have in Roma, for example, we have in Oslo still, we have in the United States in general. But something strange is now going on. Because the Arctic is warming much faster than the temperate zone, 2 to 3 times faster, and the jet stream is driven by the temperature difference between the Arctic air and the temperate air, the jet stream becomes sluggish, if you like. So the waves you are seeing, so-called Rossby waves, become bigger, and they stay in place for a long time. Actually, in 2018, when we had this heat wave in Europe, and even in Scandinavia, the forests were burning, then we had a northward Rossby wave, which was stuck for 3 months, actually. And that is already affecting our weather, even in what we call the industrialized countries. This is an effect we studied already 15 years ago. It was very hard to publish the whole thing. Now this has become common knowledge. Yeah? So you see on the right-hand side these big Rossby waves which get stuck, and we have already proven in a paper recently that the big heat waves of last year were directly referring and connected to the change in the character of the jet stream. The other big thing is that the so-called Gulf Stream in the ocean, you know, the warm water which is assembled in the Gulf of Mexico and then transferred to Europe across the Atlantic, has weakened already by 15%. There are independent studies confirming that. And this is, of course, heavily influencing the weather in Europe. So if you draw a line on a latitude from, say, London to North America, you will end up in Alaska, actually. But the weather in London is not the weather in Alaska. Why? Because you have this continuous transfer of warm water from the west to the east. Now, if the Gulf Stream becomes weaker, and the prediction is with unbridled global warming, it will even be shut down completely. You will have a complete rearrangement of weather zones on the northern hemisphere. So this is my major slide, and it's a bit complicated. Monsignor Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo has seen it many times, but it is a really important one, because it's the justification of the Paris Agreement. You know, in Paris, it was stipulated more or less as international law that we want to keep global warming below 2 degrees. So you see this gray bar, horizontal bar, that's the Paris range, 1.5 to 2 degrees. The wiggly line below it is the temperature development over the last 20,000 years. So during the last ice age, the global mean temperature was just 3 degrees cooler than before the Industrial Revolution, just 3 degrees. When you see 11,000 years ago we emerged from the last ice age, this was the time that climate became extremely stable and civilization was born. We couldn't have had agriculture, husbandries, settlements without this climate stability. Now on the right-hand side, that's very important, these are the scenarios for the future. Now if everything goes right, then we would follow the green path, you can see, and we would settle at actually global warming at 1 degree in the long run. But in fact, we are on the dark red line currently. That is the projection. So if you follow the red line, this brings us to 8 degrees warming by the year 2500. This is the middle of the road prediction. And there you see the so-called error bars, the uncertainty ranges where we think the various tipping points and the tipping elements will be activated. So on the left-hand side, you see the West Antarctic ice sheet, where parts are already pushed beyond the cliff, so they will melt down irreversibly, but the entire West Antarctic ice sheet will melt down with 5 degrees warming. But you see that also the coral reefs, that's in the black box on the right-hand side, even if we hold the Paris range, we will lose the tropical coral reefs, 90% of them. This is a big tragedy, because if we would have started global warming protection already 30 years ago, we could have avoided it. So that means if we hold the Paris range, we can avoid some of the big disasters which are above that gray bar on the right-hand side, even the meltdown of the East Antarctic ice sheet, but some of the major accidents will already happen now. This is very sad. 30 years ago we were warning about this, there was still time to avoid it, it's too late now. And it could be worse actually, because all these tipping elements could interact. If you start to melt down Greenland, when you will have directly a reduction of the Gulf Stream system, which again will suppress biological productivity in the Southern Atlantic and so on. So we have identified this. And to summarize what could happen, on the right-hand side you see where the global mean temperature could go in the next 200 years, up to 10 degrees warming. And now we can go back in time. And if you go back in time to find an epoch in the planetary history which would be comparable to that, you have to go back 60 million years. That means we could bring back our world, our natural world, within a few hundred years by 60 million years in geological time. That is the stark evidence we have to provide. I'm very sorry to say this, because you see we are really playing with the future of our civilization now. And that is precisely, I was invited to the Munich Security Conference. Now, Minister Theo Weigel knows very well about it. It is probably the most important meeting of strategic thinkers, high military people and so on, the Munich Security Conference. For the first time, climate change was highlighted in the plenary. I was invited to give the keynote speak, and I used the very, stark title, "Is this how our civilization ends?" Why? Because with rising sea level, 1.4 billion people at least would be already affected by 2060. And I show you now actually what would happen if all the ice would melt on this planet. So this is how Europe would look like. So there would be no Netherlands anymore. There would be no East Anglia. And we had some generals from the former Soviet Union, from Russia, there debating the Crimean conflict. You know, the Crimean conflict would be gone because there would be no Crimean anymore. Similarly, there would be no Florida, and also the current conflict in Venezuela would be meaningless. And finally, this is the worst of all the projections. This is Southeast Asia. Pick any capital, Jakarta, Phnom Penh, whatever, they all would be gone. So, because global sea level would rise by about 70 meters if we move our Earth actually back with 60 million years in geological time. And you clearly see this is something even generals and admirals have to worry about. This is national security affected, clearly, but at a level which is completely unprecedented. But in addition, we looked, and this is all peer-reviewed work in Nature Climate Change here. We scientists looked at the regions where if global warming is not in any way reduced, so we do business as usual, global economic business as usual, what would be the regions on this planet where all year round you could not survive outside an air-conditioned environment, so outside your hotel, whatever it is. And actually, if you look at the right-hand lower panel, everywhere you have dark red. These are the regions where all year round you cannot survive in the open space because your thermoregulatory capacity is overthrown because of humidity and temperature. So these are the regions of the world where you could not live anymore. They become uninhabitable under this global warming scenario. So, and you would of course, so these are, we did a report for the Asian Development Bank. These would be the refugee trajectories, if you like, in Bangladesh, in Tuvalu, in the Mekong Delta, and so on. So I skip this. So what could be done about it? I do believe that without a global migration management plan, we have no chance to mitigate this type of crisis. And you know that, let me see, this, sorry, I have to go back. This man, Fridtjof Nansen, who is the godfather of polar research, so he was a huge explorer, he was a scientist and so on. But actually in 1923, he proposed the so-called Nansen passport for all these people who had lost their national identity in the First World War, where they were expelled, like Igor Stravinsky, for example, from Russia by Lenin. And so an international passport was created, which was accepted in the end by more than 50 nations, where people were allowed to enter nation states, actually, territory, in the aftermath of the crisis of the First World War. And we have proposed, actually, to introduce something like a climate passport, where people whose territory will be destroyed, actually, by sea level rise, Tuvalu, Kiribati, the Maldives, to be allowed to enter those countries who have contributed most to their destruction, including the United States, China, Germany, UK, and so on. This is a very provocative proposal, but I think it's an absolutely logical one. So just to show you the global injustice we have now, this is a paper, if you just focus on the map. Now, the map shows in colors what the respective national strategy contributes to global warming. So, if the country is marked in red, when its national climate policy contributes to 4 degrees warming. And if it's dark red, it's even 5 degrees warming. Now you can look around the world and you can pick your favorite country, say Canada. Canada is actually contributing its share of 5 degrees warming on this planet. The same is true for Russia, for South Africa, for Argentina, for Libya. And even Europe is contributing to 3 degrees warming with the current policies. The only countries in the world who are not contributing to that, who are in line with the Paris Agreement, are the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, who will be affected most by global warming. This is the absurdist sort of consequence of global injustice, actually. Now let me continue. What can be done? I will be very quick on this. There are 2 things which I have mentioned already. Rapid decarbonization of our economies. We actually published a paper where we looked at the various sectors, energy, power production, renewable energies clearly have to be advanced much more quickly than currently. You have to get rid of the combustion engine almost immediately and have to replace this by electric cars. You have to switch from concrete and steel to wood as the basic material for construction, as we have done many centuries before. And actually, if you ask yourself, having in mind the Notre Dame accident, whether wood can be fireproof, yes, it can be. Actually, you can treat it in a way that it is more fireproof than steel and concrete, but new technologies have to be used. And the same is true for agriculture. No tillage agriculture would be a very important means. This has been presented at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences by our colleagues from Argentina, for example. So rapid decarbonization is one side of the coin. Maybe I should show you this example from Germany, because we have Theo Weigel here, and I'm myself from Germany, and I have advised Angela Merkel for 25 years on climate policy. Now, Germany has decided the so-called Energiewende, the energy transition, and this was more or less completed in the year 2011 when Germany decided to phase out nuclear energy. And now, of course, people have often said, well, if Germany phases out nuclear, there will be much more production of power from coal. But look for yourself now, how things have developed. So you see nuclear, the red line. You see lignite coal and hard coal. These are the black and the gray lines. And you have renewables. It all starts in 1990. And this is the current development. So you see there's a crossover, and now the electricity production from renewables is already around 35%, and nuclear goes down. It will be phased out by 2022. And I was actually a member of the so-called Coal Commission, which came up with a compromise to also phase out power production from coal by the year 2038, or probably even earlier. It's a big, big challenge, but it can be done. So Germany is not a hero and not a saint, but it's neither a villain in the global theater. But let me tell you also about something which really worries me. I mean, the other things I told you are not cheering you up, I understand. They are quite worrisome, but what is the worst of all we are doing currently now? This is a study which was published just recently, that we lose the biomass of insects globally 2.5% per year. This is an exponential decay, actually. And if you lose the insects, you lose the birds, and if you lose the birds, you lose, in the end, the forests. And this is happening all over the planet. So the natural systems are actually doing us a big, big service because they are sucking up about 60% of our CO2 emissions. And I told you our emissions have to be reduced rapidly. But what are we doing? We are killing our best friends at the same time, the rainforest, the peatlands, and so on. We are killing the natural carbon sinks who help us to at least have a not so fast development in the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. So we're doing two stupid things at the same time. We are emitting lots of CO2 and methane, and at the same time we are destroying the potential sinks which could at least partially suck up the greenhouse gases we are emitting. So we have to stop both things. We have to reduce, we have to decarbonize the global economy, and at the same time we have to protect our natural ecosystems. In the Amazon, in the Congo, in Borneo, Sulawesi, wherever. And by the way, the worst thing you can do is to drain a peat bog. The marshlands of this planet hold much more carbon than all the forests together. So draining a peat bog is the worst crime you can do to the natural environment. So let me come to the end. Well, let's see. So 2 years ago, I was very depressed about the state of the climate policy. So I did this cartoon, because when I lived in California in 1988, there was already a big debate about global warming. In the Senate, Jim Hansen gave a talk, which raised a lot of attention. And where we had this situation, you see, if we all imagine ourselves driving together in a big bus in 1988, so there was this distant sign on the front pane, across the front line that global warming might be a big problem. And when in 2018 we are already in the midst of global warming, but nobody takes care anymore. And you see this little boy who is even watching what is going on in reality on his tablet. So I was feeling in a way quite desperate about the youth, the young people whose future is actually stolen if we don't do anything about global warming. But that has changed radically. It has changed in part because of the intervention of Pope Francis with the encyclical Laudato Si, but now finally there's also this youth movement. So you see Greta Thunberg, she came to visit me in Potsdam 3 weeks ago. She's now the Jeanne d'Arc, if you like, of climate activism. And there are many actually parallels between Jeanne d'Arc and Greta Thunberg. She's 16 years old, and actually Jeanne d'Arc set out from Lorraine at the age of 16 and simply told the truth about the state of France at the time, and Greta Thunberg is just speaking out about the state of the world in very simple words. And the very interesting thing is that there is now emerging, and that is maybe my positive message at the end of this talk, there's now emerging a triangle of hope, if you like. Because the most striking thing with the young people all over the world now is that they say, our reference point is the science, it's reason, it's evidence, it's facts. While you have somebody sitting in the White House who thinks facts are irrelevant, actually. So it's the young people, not the adults, not the educated people, not the people representing the elites of this world. It's the young people who say, our reference point is the scientific evidence. That is something which is completely revolutionizing, in my view, our way of treating evidence. Then there is faith, faith as represented by Laudato Si, the common home of humanity, la casa común. So the Catholic principle of universality. And you have, of course, the scientists who finally find at least two audiences, the faith communities and the young people to speak to. And this is a strategic triangle which may save the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Schellnhuber.